When Moscow launched its invasion, there were concerns that Ukraine's military would be quickly outnumbered and overwhelmed. But Ukrainian forces have mounted a fierce resistance, and the war is still going on more than 2 months later. Here to talk more about this is Michael Weiss. He is the news director at New Lines magazine. That's a global affairs magazine that specializes in long-form reporting. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
So how is the Russian army holding up right now?
Not very well. According to the British Ministry of Defense Intelligence, they have lost 25% of the invasion force that they had committed to Ukraine. This is about 120 battalion tactical groups that have been rendered combat ineffective. I mean, these are staggering numbers for a campaign that's now entering its third month, much less for a country that was said to have possessed the world's second most powerful military. They have comported themselves atrociously on the battlefield. I was in Kyiv a few weeks ago, and I also reported from a town called Borodyanka, where the Russians occupied. But before occupying, they basically targeted civilian-only infrastructure. There were no military barracks or facilities in that town. So this was a campaign of slaughter and extermination that has gone sideways for them militarily. And I'm seeing today, in fact, this morning, the Ukrainians destroyed 2 Raptor patrol boats manned by the Russian Navy using Turkish drones. That Ukraine doesn't have a navy. And for a country that has no navy, they've already sunk Russia's flagship battle cruiser of the Black Sea Fleet, and now 2 patrol boats in one day. So I think it's not to overstate matters at all to say that what Russia thought it could do and what a lot of us in the West had anticipated Russia being able to do, they have not done at all.
So, Michael, I understand you have some new reporting about a high-ranking Russian official who was in a war zone in Ukraine. Yeah. What can you tell us about that?
Well, not just a high-ranking Russian official. This is the chief of the general staff of Russia's armed forces. So literally the top officer in their military. And he was, it's been confirmed that he was in Izium, which is in the northeast of Ukraine. This is a town that the Russians took a few weeks ago. They haven't really managed to break out of it, though, to take more terrain. This is so to complete their new strategic objective of occupying essentially all of the Donbass. But General Valery Gerasimov, this is a guy who's been in his post since 2012. He authored a white paper several years ago, which made a lot of hay in the analytic community, basically envisaging Russia's way of warfare, largely as a reflection of how General Gerasimov saw America going to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I don't need to tell anyone watching the show that America doesn't go to war by sending the chief of the Joint Chiefs into a combat zone. And the Ukrainian military intelligence suggested to me yesterday that they might have lightly injured him in an artillery strike, which killed another general and took out as many as 200 senior staff officers there. So again, they're not just sending rank and file, they're sending essentially their command into the battle zone. Yeah,
I've actually been quite surprised by the number of high-ranking Russian military personnel who have died. Like every few weeks or so, we hear about another person. I'm always surprised that they're that vulnerable. Right. You know,
9 generals and counting so far. I mean, it's staggering losses for them.
So let me ask you a question about that. What sort of impact then does a loss like that have on the ability of the Russian military to, strategize and plan and lead?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Russians have been bedeviled by a host of problems, not least of which is corruption, which has rotted out, virtually all levels of Russian state and society. It beggars belief that we couldn't have imagined in the West that this would have been a major pathology eating away at the heart of the Russian military industrial complex. So, it's the kind of thing where they say they're going to build 100 tanks and only 85 get built or 70 get built. And the money that was allocated for that program is simply just siphoned off the top by warrant officers and majors and colonels. But another huge problem has been logistics. It's not enough to commit firepower and manpower into a war zone. You have to fuel the trucks. You have to make sure the wheels and the treads on your tanks are combat ready and that they've been maintained well. You have to do things like not go into a war zone or battle space in the middle of spring when the ground is thawing out and everything is just turned to mud. The Ukrainians, remember that column of armored vehicles that was snaking in northwest of Kyiv. Everyone was terrified of this. The Ukrainians thought this was the biggest joke because basically they blew up a dam and flooded the zone, and these trucks got stuck in the mud for several weeks, and the Ukrainians were able to just pick them off. So the question is, are they going to have an easier time in the east, where they're more entrenched? That is, the Russians, since 2014, they've been occupying whole swaths of this terrain. But so far, look, we're about into week 2 or 3 of this massive offensive for Donbass, and the Russians have made minimal progress. And today, I've seen credible evidence that they're being pushed now out of Kharkiv, all the way back up to the border. So the Ukrainians are taking the fight to them.
So, Michael, then, given all that you've just told us, given that there's this UK Ministry of Defense report that labels most of the Russian troops and materiel combat ineffective, and given that on the 9th of this month, there is supposedly going to be a very large military parade in Moscow to memorialize Russia's victory in World War II. It had been postponed. So some 11,000 Russian troops parading through the streets, given all that we've talked about. Help me understand that. And if you're Vladimir Putin, surrounded by 11,000 members of the military who are, by all accounts, demoralized, facing crushing losses, how concerning would it be for him?
Well, he seems to be kind of trapped inside his own head. Whether or not this is just a function of getting bad intelligence, where he's being told everything's going swimmingly and we're achieving all our objectives, or Putin simply doesn't care. If Ukraine turns into a meat grinder, he will send tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of soldiers to their death or to become casualties, taken off the battlefield, rendered combat ineffective. The funny thing about this Victory Day parade that's due to take place on May 9th is all of their most sophisticated and modernized weaponry will not be on display because they've lost it all in Ukraine. I'm seeing, railway cars filled with, World War II era relics that the Russians are now committing to theater because they've run out of all their best stuff. Precision guided munitions. One of the things Ukraine's deputy defense minister told me a few weeks ago is everything that the Ukrainians have shot out of the sky, whether it's aircraft, helicopters, drones, or cruise missiles, when they open it up, the guts of these devices, the electronics, are all come from the United States and Europe. So sanctions are going to take a big bite out of Russia's ability to basically select targeting packs and hit the things that they want to hit. This is one of the reasons they're just kind of blasting everything in sight. They don't have that kind of capability anymore. So yeah, look, the real question here is what happens on May 9th. Does Putin announce some kind of Pyrrhic victory and go home? Probably not. Will he announce mass mobilization and a declaration of all-out war? It's important to remember he has couched this campaign for the last 2 months and change as a, quote, special military operation. The minute he declares open war on Ukraine, they can start calling up conscripts, and 18-year-olds from Siberia are going to get called in and go to the front and fight. The Ukrainians, however, are not afraid of this. It's sort of an extraordinary thing when you go to this country. All of the doom and the misery and the atrocities that we've seen and that have been exhaustively reported, by myself included, that has to be counterposed with an incredible degree of morale, optimism, resiliency, humor. The Ukrainians have been just dripping with contempt and derision for their adversary. They think the Russians are a busted flush, and there's absolute hatred at all levels now for this country. These countries used to be culturally intertwined in a way where, if you lived in Ukraine, you had relatives in Russia, and you called them up and everybody kind of got along. I think what Putin has done is going to resound for generations to come. He has effectively destroyed any leverage that Russia has had in this country, historically, politically, economically, and that's not something that he's going to regain.
No, that is like sort of the mass irony of this whole thing. Is so many of the things that he has railed against, he's actually sort of fortifying. NATO is now sort of more on the same page than ever before. Ukraine has no interest in being part of Russia at all. It's all the opposite.
And Michael,
3 days after Victory Day, Finland is going to start its candidacy for NATO. So 3 days after Victory Day, Putin is going to wake up and see the initial stage of Russia gaining an 830-mile border with another NATO member state. Exactly the opposite contingency, that he was seeking by going to war in
So,
Ukraine.
Michael,
so
yes or no? Michael, yes or no?
Yeah.
Given this Victory Day parade that President Putin is going to display on May 9th, which is to celebrate Russia's victory in World War II, given that Russia lost 20 million people during World War II, given his love, his nostalgia for the old Soviet state, yes or no? Do you think that Vladimir Putin could conceivably not care if millions of his countrymen and women die in this conflict with Ukraine?
Well, it's important to note the Soviet Union lost that number of people in World War II. And by the way, quite a lot of them were Ukrainians. And quite a lot of them were in countries that are now part of NATO, including the Baltic states. But look, this is a man who does not seem to care at all about his own people, much less people in countries that his army, or whatever you want to call this contingent of murderers, rapists, and thieves, is occupying. So no, I don't think he has any compunction about sending, as I said earlier, 18-year-olds from Siberia to their death in a not even a faraway land next door. And from all the reporting I've seen from people who are very tapped in and who have a kind of good beat on what's happening inside, not really the Kremlin anymore, because I think that the circle has narrowed to just a handful of people, security hawks that he surrounds himself with. This is a man of absolute certitude. He does not care. He thinks that things are going to go his way in the mid to long term. And I think it's the West has now, in a way that I frankly did not expect and could not have envisaged 3 months ago, come together and said, we're going to rob him of this opportunity. I mean, all of the weapon systems the Ukrainians have been begging for years, 155 millimeter artillery, howitzers from the United States, the Czech Republic, the UK, things like that, multiple launch rocket systems, they're now getting. I mean, this is the other side of the story, right? We're not just helping them defend themselves. We are now creating Ukraine. We essentially, without even their having to join NATO, we are helping them modernize to such an extent that they are going to become a NATO peer military by the end of this war. And that's basically what they wanted at the outset.
Man, Michael Weiss, this has been a great conversation.
It really has, and we could keep talking. Obviously, our producers are screaming at us. We got to go, but thank you, and come back and talk to us again, because this has really been an illuminating discussion. We appreciate it.
Yep.